And welcome back to GMT. We're going to go back to very much our top story, the verdict in the trial of Oscar Pistorius. Judge Thokozile Masipa is still summing up her findings, but she has already rejected all possible murder charges. She said the prosecution had failed to prove Pistorius intended to kill his girlfriend Reeva Steenkamp at his home in Pretoria, and she's now considering whether he is guilty of culpable homicide or manslaughter. Well, Karin Giannone is in Pretoria for us, following all the details, Karin, as we await the restart of this dramatic verdict.
And what an incredible moment to call a lunch break, David. An absolute cliffhanger, just as she had said that the charge of murder, first of all premeditated murder and then murder without premeditation, was effectively out. That she will now have two options to consider: involuntary culpable homicide, which is known as manslaughter in other parts of the world, or the other option for Judge Masipa to acquit Oscar Pistorius. But we don't know what she's going to say. She has called this lunch adjournment, and we are waiting for the court to reconvene for her to continue at this incredibly rapid pace, unexpectedly fast, slicing through days of prosecution evidence, days of circumstantial evidence, discussions about screams heard by neighbours, discussions about even the contents of Reeva Steenkamp's stomach, and all that surrounding evidence. She has just said none of it is conclusive enough to prove murder beyond reasonable doubt. So now we're left with the two options I just mentioned. With me to discuss them a little more, Michael Motsoneng, who's a lawyer here in Pretoria. And Michael, it was incredible the way she just went through. We were here for weeks listening to hour upon hour of the intricacies of where the fans were in the bedroom, what neighbour said, who they'd heard, whether it was a man or a woman screaming. Why did it all fall down?
Well, it didn't, because what the judge does is she has to consider everything in context. So it was incumbent upon the prosecution as well as the defense to put a story. So they couldn't just be as brief as the judge was. They have to put together a story and allow the judge to look at that story in context and as a whole. And that's what she said as well. And in her own words, she said, you don't look at the evidence in piecemeal fashion. You got to look at it as a whole and in context. And to do that, you would need a defense as well as a state prosecution to give you a story to work with. And unfortunately for Karin, that story did not persuade the judge today.
And the issue was all about intention. That's what the prosecution had to prove. We knew who fired the gun. It was what was going through Oscar Pistorius' mind.
Yeah, and you know, I think when I looked at the trial for the whole, 40 days, I thought Karin at all times was on top of his game, was doing a good job, and at least I wasn't persuaded that he established premeditated murder, but certainly that he established murder, I thought that was certainly something that stood. So I'm so wrong about that I don't even know what's going to happen next. I can't tell you whether she's going to acquit or convict him of culpable homicide, because I was wrong the first time. I'm doubtful I'll be right this time around.
Just explain for us the charge of culpable homicide. What does it actually mean? Well,
the difference between, for me to explain it properly, I'd have to distinguish it from murder. Murder requires intention, so you must intend the result. And with culpable homicide, or in your jurisdiction you call it manslaughter, it's negligence. The requirement is negligence. So you may not have intended to kill somebody, but the way you conducted yourself was negligent. And for you to be negligent, you'd have to fall short of the standard of a reasonable person. What a reasonable person does is he wouldn't arm himself, go into a door, fire 4 shots, and not expect to kill somebody else. So when you are a diligent person who exercises reasonable care, that's the test that we're looking at when we're looking at culpable homicide. So the question is, will the judge find that he, in this case, was negligent or not, or whether he acted as a reasonable person would?
And the options are those two options we've talked about, culpable homicide and acquitting Oscar Pistorius entirely. Judge Masipa has not pulled back from really criticising Oscar Pistorius' conduct in the witness stand.
Yeah, and that also, leads further to the further surprise, because everybody is in agreement that Oscar Pistorius was not a good witness. In fact, a witness who comes and tenders more than one defense already has put himself in a corner that should be very difficult to come out of. And it would appear to me that Oscar, in this case, has come out of the corner, despite the fact that he's placed himself in that corner. So you can't on the one hand have done something through reflex action or automatism, as we call it in law, and on the other hand have acted in self-defense. Those two things are mutually exclusive. So when somebody tenders more than one version, that already, to me, as if I'm judging the matter, says to me that he doesn't know what the story is. If you are acting in self-defense, you're acting in self-defense, and full stop. If you didn't intend and this was a reflexive action, it's a reflexive action, full stop. It can't be both. So already, he managed to come out of that corner. So very surprising to me.
And the charge of culpable homicide carries a sentence of around, well, it can be as much as 15 to 20 years, but...
Well, culpable homicide wouldn't go as much as, over 10. You're looking at less than 10 years. And of course, there are many other sentences other than direct imprisonment. He could be asked to do, he could be placed on alternative sentences which do not require direct imprisonment. So he could very well not even serve 1 day in prison.
And of course that, if there were to be a conviction, the sentencing wouldn't happen today.
No,
it would be
happen.
at yet another court date.
Yeah, because what you'd have to do then is that the parties, the defence as well as the state, would have to come back again. And the state on the one hand would have to show aggravating circumstances, and the defence on the other hand would have to show mitigating circumstances, and that would determine the sentence.
But the remarkable thing, and the very dramatic thing we've heard in the last hour, is that Oscar Pistorius, whatever happens in the next hour or so, will not be leaving court a convicted murderer.
Absolutely. So he's not guilty of murder. He will look at competent verdicts, but certainly not murder. He's gotten away with at least he's won that battle against Karin Giannone.
Okay, Michael, we will leave it there for just a moment. Let's just recap on what Judge Masipa had to say about the whole issue of first premeditated murder and then another kind of murder under South African law, dolus eventualis.